Since the mid to late 1980s, there have been numerous restrictions where smokers and vapors can smoke. That is something they've had to adjust to as early as 1990. In this Ava Zinn Wants to Know investigation, I'm investigating the various smoking and vaping bans here in Fort Wayne. Workers, employees, college students, even tenants at apartment complexes being forced out onto the street. They've become outcasts in a municipality that has been turning a big thumbs down on smoking and vaping.
Pretty much the same. I think people want to smoke. They should be able to smoke where they want to smoke.
To use tobacco or not rested on the individual person until the non-smoking public heard brand new medical evidence several years back. That's when, in the 1980s throughout the 2000s, we began to see no smoking signs on domestic flights, schools, and government buildings. Then on June 1st, 2007, the Fort Wayne City Council passed a smoking ban that went into effect and was recently amended to include vaping. This means smoking and or vaping is prohibited inside many businesses, public transportation, bars, restaurants, and much less your own home. What do you think about Fort Wayne's smoking ordinance that went into effect on June 1st, 2007?
Well, back then, I had been on council for 8 years, and there was a national movement to improve the quality of life for citizens, particularly those of us who are non-smokers, which majority of Americans were non-smokers. So all across the United States, there was legislation being passed by various city councils to ban smoking in certain public environments. And at that time, John Crawford was the author of the legislation when I came on council in 2000, and he had talked about trying to get 5 votes so that we could pass the legislation, and we were able to get the prerequisite number of votes to pass the legislation. And it was a quality of life decision. It was a health issue because Surgeon General was beginning to bring out additional information that showed that smoking was hazardous to your health, to the point that they even put it on the packs of cigarettes. If you may remember back then, before then, you hadn't had those kind of things where they start putting, Surgeon General says that, you know, products of this and da-da-da-da. So we were able to get enough votes to pass the legislation.
How do you feel about Fort Wayne's smoking ordinance that went into effect on June 1st?
Now, that was a continuum of the same initiative. In the state of Indiana, there's a group called Smoke Free Indiana, and locally there's a Smoke Free Indiana office, and they were saying we now are looking at vaping because we're finding that vaping has similar kind of negative side effects, not only on the person who consumes that particular product, but also other people within that environment. Because when they first started vaping, the producers are adding different flavors and different smells and of course different products. So it's got some of the same harmful products in it as cigarettes and tobaccos and other products such as that. So they approached us again, City Council, Smoke Free Indiana, and they were saying, we want you to consider adding this on as an additional ordinance, because Bloomington and South Bend and other cities had already enacted it. So
Indianapolis too.
Indianapolis, and we just took their legislation and copied it basically, and we got it passed here in Fort Wayne.
Okay. Do you think the smoking ban is effective?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm gonna go back to the original smoking ban. For those of us who are non-smokers, you could go to a club and come home smelling like smoke. You had to send your clothes to the cleaners, plus the secondhand side effects. And you know, initially, because I supported it, a lot of people were mad at us. And Dr. Crawford actually lost the election after that, because he ran on the ticket of, I was the one that introduced smoking, and he lost. So there was enough upset voters that voted him out of office. But in terms of 4 years later, he ran for office again and won because people said, aha, I see the positive effects of not having smoke in restaurants and bars and bowling alleys and any public places. So yes, I think it's from public health issue, very positive.
15 years later, do you still agree with the total smoking ban at various businesses, bars, and restaurants in Fort Wayne?
100%. I believe that my mom and dad both died of cancer, and they were smokers, and we as kids probably have secondhand smoke more than likely. Because I say yes, the data confirms that, you know, of course, lung diseases and other diseases have down based on the fact that smoking, of course, is down. So therefore, I would say yes. 15 years later, it was very effective, very positive, very challenging legislation. But when you're an elected official, you're going to make decisions that make people happy. You're going to make decisions that make people mad at you. And hopefully, in the long run, in the rearview mirror, you can look back and say that was a very good decision based on the results that we have today.
When Dr. Crawford was on the Fort Wayne City Council, people really felt about Fort Wayne's smoking ban when it passed and became ordinance. Some bar patrons and citizens were angry or upset about the smoking ban. Was it really a big issue back in 2007 as it is in 2022?
Let me put it like this. Back then, it was a bigger issue because it was new. The fact that the most current is vaping, we already have the smoking ordinance on the books, and people are adhering to that. So therefore, there's not nearly as much pushback. Maybe the younger generation of vapors, they're upset. But back in 07, the smoking ordinance was very controversial. Vis-a-vis Dr. Crawford lost that election based on the fact that he had authored and actually ran on his re-election ticket that he introduced. So I would say that it was, for him, catastrophic politically, but in terms of the greater good, in terms of public health and safety, I think it was the best thing that could happen to any community.
Another question I was going to ask Dr. John Crawford is that many of these smoke-free supporters not only wanted to ban smoking in public places and restaurants, but they have an even greater goal to decrease smoking and vaping.
Oh, I don't know what their motivation is other than public places and restaurants. In your own private home, no. I don't think there should be any rule against people smoking privately in their own residence, per se. But anything public where the public is able to congregate, I think, and I support, as we now have, smoking ban.
Okay, because there is a smoking ban at IvyTech and on Fort Wayne Housing Authority's properties, yeah.
Public.
What do you think about Fort Wayne smoking ordinance that went into effect on June the 1st, 2007?
I think it was great progress. It was a huge step forward. It was completely transformative, actually. I mean, I can speak of that. I mean, I wasn't the coalition coordinator at the time. I was on the coalition, but not very heavily involved. So I wasn't very involved in actually helping that to happen. But I remember what an impact it made, because everywhere I went before that, I was exposed to secondhand smoke, including at my workplace. And it changed after that. And I mean, I was really bothered by it in my workplace. I think I was working for the AIDS task force at the time, and we had probably, I'm trying to remember how many staff we had, maybe a dozen, maybe 10, something like that. And I bet half of them smoked. And then a whole bunch of the clients smoked, and they'd come into the office and sit in the back room and smoke. And it was like, it would drift right through the ventilation system. I mean, I'd sit in my office and just it was awful, just breathing it all the time. I was like, once that ordinance passed, no more smoking in the workplace, you know, and I could go into bars and restaurants and no more smoking. It was so much better. It was so much, you know, yeah, I'm really sensitive to it. And of course, I also know how very dangerous it is. So it was really a very, very big step forward to protect all workers from having to breathe toxic chemicals on the job. And, you know, people will sometimes focus on, well, you don't have to go there if they smoke, right? Well, when they pretty much smoked everywhere, you didn't have much choice. And secondly, people got to have jobs and they shouldn't be exposed to it on the job. So even if a client could choose to go somewhere else if it's a restaurant or whatever, they can't, it's like, if smoking is widespread, you got to have jobs, you're going to end up being exposed to it on the job. So I don't know if I'm tired. So if I'm not being very articulate, that's because I'm tired, because I've been sitting through hours and hours of training and it's really tiring. But yeah, so it was huge. And I think we were if I'm not mistaken, I think we were the first or one of the first cities in Indiana to pass a pretty comprehensive ordinance. I mean, it did make a few exceptions at the time for, they exempted tobacco retailer shops, and they exempted, not private organizations. I'm trying to remember what else. It was like there was a certain percentage, I think it was up to 20% of hotel rooms could be allowed to be smoking. And then there was one other exemption. What was the other one? I think it was of all things, like nursing homes, but certain, like that if a certain number of the residents agreed to it, they would allow smoking in that nurse, and they all voted on it or something. But then the state law came around in 2012 and did away with those exceptions. So they went away, fortunately, what was that, 7 years later. But at the time when Fort Wayne passed it, I mean, I don't think anyone else in the state had as good an ordinance as we did. So it was one of the first ones.
Do you think the policy is effective?
Yeah, it is very effective, I think. I mean, if the goal is to protect people from all the toxins in cigarette smoke, I think it's done a really good job, because, you know, you can sit in restaurants and bars in Fort Wayne and you're not being exposed to secondhand smoke for the most part. I mean, you know, there may be an exception here and there sometimes, places that are not observing it very well, but man, 99.9%, you're not being exposed to secondhand smoke. So yeah, it's effective. And the workers aren't either.
15 years later, do you agree with a total smoking ban at various businesses, bars, and restaurants in Fort Wayne?
Yes.
How about at IvyTech Fort Wayne and/or Purdue Fort Wayne?
Yes.
Even your own home?
I don't know that I would say in your own home. I mean, that gets tricky. And a lot depends on whether other people share that space with you and what your home situation is. I mean, if your home is in a building that is shared with other people and there's, you know, shared air ventilation, then that's an issue of, you know, what you do is affecting other people. So that gets trickier, but I don't think that anybody who smokes has the right to force it on anybody else, because this is not something, it's a little like, you know, if I drink, I'm putting it in my body, but I'm not putting it in anybody else's body, right? So it's really, as long as I'm not out drinking and driving and not getting violent, I'm not affecting anybody but me. But if I smoke, I'm putting it in the air that other people breathe. So if my home, I'm the only one that lives there,
right,
nobody has a right to say anything about that unless I don't own the home. You know, if somebody else owns the home, they have the right to say, you can't do that to my property because it damages it. So yeah, it really depends on the home. We certainly advocate for, if it's a multi-unit kind of housing, like in apartments, those should be smoke-free because it's shared. You know, it's like you're not living in a place where what you do only affects you.
Yeah. Okay. When Dr. John Crawford of the Fort Wayne City Council was on the Fort Wayne City Council,
yeah,
I really felt about Fort Wayne smoking ban when it passed and became ordinance. Some bar patrons and citizens were angry or upset about the smoking ban. Was it really a big issue back in 2007 as it is in 2022?
I think it was a bigger issue then than it is now. I mean, there were a lot of people who took it as, you know, this is somehow against smokers. This is infringing on their rights or their freedoms. And I think more people understand it now, that it's like, it's protecting everybody's health, and it's really the burden of smoking ought to be on the person choosing to do smoking, not on the people who are going to be affected, you know, not on everybody else. So I think it's far more accepted now. It's a much bigger issue. It was a much bigger issue then because it was a big change. I mean, people weren't used to it. They were used to just being able to light up and not having to think about other people, right? And now all of a sudden we were saying you can't do that because it affects other people. So yeah, of course it generated some resistance. And bar owners, for a large, I mean, to the largest extent, it was really about, they were afraid they were going to lose business. And I think what many of them found is they didn't lose business. They actually gained business because most people are not smokers. Most people don't want to be exposed to smoke. So, you know, there were more people who wanted to come out and patronize those bars because they became smoke-free, not vice versa.
Many of these smoke-free supporters not only wanted to ban smoking in public places and restaurants, but they have an even greater goal to decrease smoking and or vaping.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, our goal, I mean, I'm saying that as a tobacco control advocate. I mean, my goal is to end people, you know, to try to protect people's health from the tobacco industry. And the tobacco industry to me includes the vaping industry. So all of these products lead people to nicotine addiction, which has an incredible number of bad effects on health. And it isn't just about cigarette smoke. It's also the chemicals in vaping. It's also what nicotine does to the brain, what it does to the blood vessels, you know, to the heart. I mean, there's a lot of issues that, and it's like, yeah, people have the, you know, they have the right to harm themselves if they want to, but I'd like to see them be informed about all the risks before they get into that harm. And so often people start this when they're kids and they're addicted. I mean, the majority of people who smoke or vape get addicted to it before they're even adults. So they don't really know what they're getting into. You know, there's not any consciousness about that. There's not any thinking ahead. They don't realize the impact it's going to have on their life, the rest of their lives and their health. And it's like, yeah, we're out there trying to keep that from happening, like protect people from this predatory industry that's coming after them, trying to get them addicted.
What about the debate between public health concerns you mentioned versus personal individual rights?
What about what was the third word there? What about the fourth word?
What about the debate between public health concerns you mentioned versus personal individual rights?
So I don't think that anyone has a right to do anything that harms other people. I mean, I start with that basic, you know, it's kind of like the same kind of principle that would apply to, I do not have the right to get in my car and drive 120 miles an hour down the highway, right? I might feel like I should have that right, that I should have that freedom. Hey, it's my car, I can drive it however the heck I want to, right? That would be the equivalent of the smoker or vapor who says, it's my body, I can do whatever the hell I want with it. How can you tell me not what to do? Well, the problem is it's not just doing it to your body. It's like you're blowing things out into the air that everybody else is breathing. So to me, the individual freedom stops at the point where it infringes on other people's freedom and other people's rights. And I think that everyone has the right to breathe clean air. So we don't have the right to take that away from anyone. You know, I might have the right to give myself dirty air if I want to, as long as I don't impose it on anyone else. And that's always, you know, finding where that line is. Where can you have the freedom to exercise something that is destructive to yourself? You know, as long as it's destructive only to you, probably no one else has the right to say anything. I mean, we might want to give you information about it just out of a compassionate desire to help people. Like, I don't want to see anyone destroy themselves, but I don't really have the right to tell you can't do it. But I do have the right to say, I mean, I think we all do. We have the right to say, no, you can't do X, Y, or Z if it's harming other people.
One of the primary reasons for the smoking ban is basically the health of fellow residents in Fort Wayne, fellow students at IvyTech Fort Wayne, Purdue Fort Wayne, and tenants living at Fort Wayne Housing Authority Public Housing. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, I'm not following the question. My thoughts on?
The health of fellow residents in Fort Wayne.
Yeah. I think the whole principle behind having smoke-free air policies, whether they're in housing or whether they're in, you know, public places and private businesses, wherever they are, the whole point of them is to protect the health of the people living there or working there or doing business there. You know, it's to say, we want to create and maintain and protect a healthy environment for folks. And I think that's important. Yeah. In the same way that we wouldn't, you know, like in a restaurant, you're not allowed to do things that are unsanitary, right? Because it would be to the risk of public health. Like, you know, workers in a restaurant, there's all kinds of regulations if you're in a restaurant, right? And they're all about protecting the health of people so that they don't come there and get sick. It's the same kind of principle.
While most people I spoke with agree that smoking and vaping can cause health problems, Fort Wayne's smoking ban 15 years later still has some people divided. Would you still smoke and or vape if there were designated smoking areas?
Yeah.
I reached out to officials at IvyTech as well as some students at IvyTech and Purdue Fort Wayne, and I have yet to hear back. I also reached out to Fort Wayne City Councilwoman Sharon Tucker about Fort Wayne smoking ordinance. She declined the request and sent me a statement via email saying, I quote, "I was not on the council or involved with the smoking ordinance during its birth." End quote. I also did not reach out to Fort Wayne Housing Authority because of a perceived conflict of interest. I'm Ava Zinn reminding you to help ensure a child's education, have them immunized, and make Fort Wayne good news to you.